Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. As promised, we are here and we're going to be talking about Fourth Wing. We are going to keep the first little bit of this spoiler-free, but this is quickly going to turn into a spoiler-filled discussion. But we're going to go ahead and give you our quick 30-ish second feeling about the book overall. You can go ahead and start us off.
So I enjoyed the book. I landed at about a 3 stars. We have a very similar rating system. There were things that I liked, things that I didn't, but in the end, I ended up enjoying it, and I think that I'm going to launch into the next book here soon.
Yeah, and I actually ended up having a similar kind of feeling. I initially thought I was going to have a pretty miserable time with this book. I didn't think there was really going to be anything here for me at all, and that is actually not true. There was definitely some things in here outside of even just the romance aspects of this book, but just some stuff with the magic and how some of the political things progressed as the story went along that made me not hate read this book. There are definitely some very like cringeworthy moments and some things that just made me absolutely like laugh maniacally multiple times. But overall, it's really hard for me to not give this at least a 3-star rating. It's one of those weird books where it's like I didn't really enjoy my time with it, but I also didn't really hate my time with it. So it's going to kind of come down into that middle ground there. And so overall, I can't believe it. It's going to end up being a 3-star rating for me. And I will probably continue to read along with you because, especially with the way this book ends, this ending is absolutely like one of the worst cliffhangers I have ever read in my entire life. Like the fact, like I can't imagine reading this when this came out and then having to wait for Iron Flame to come out afterwards.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely one of the worst things ever. So that is pretty much going to be our spoiler-free section. From here on out, it's full game, full spoilers. Obviously, we haven't read anything past this, so plenty of speculation and everything is going to come from here. So let's go ahead and dive in. And I want to start first with who your favorite character was.
I think my favorite character in the whole book is Xaden, and that is because I think he's also the most fleshed out character. There are a lot of characters in this book that are very one note, and I think that that is one of my biggest complaints with the book as a whole, is that a lot of these characters don't have a lot of growth and they just feel very plain. And the two characters that I think develop the most are Liam and Xaden, and I went into this thinking that I wasn't going to like Xaden and that he was going to be every archetypal bad boy love interest in every...
I don't think he's that different. I really don't. I'm actually shocked that he's your favorite character.
Well, I think what's different is, and I think that you can tell that this is written by a woman, is that he's pretty trustworthy from the jump, and he does a lot of things that are not covert in a way that where he's like trying to hide what he's doing from Violet, and that is very different than a lot of, especially YA romance, which this reminds me of a lot.
Yeah, so
I appreciated that.
So my favorite character is probably, if it's either between Liam or what's her dragon's name?
Taryn,
yeah. Taryn is actually probably my favorite character. There's not a whole lot there, but like he's like that archetypal grouchy superior person with a lot of power. He just happens to be her dragon in this one. So like overall, he's probably my favorite. I found him to be somewhat humorous too throughout it. And then if not him, Liam, rip, I guess. But you started to hint on something I did want to talk about. This book overall obviously has some very explicit material in it. And everybody in this book is supposed to be at least 20 years old. And I know this is one of the things we did talk about throughout this entire book. This felt so much more like a group of like 16 to like 18-year-olds, which is fine until you get to like that explicit material that happens in here. And so that is one thing that we both talked about multiple times, where it was really hard for me to believe that these people were the age that they were, doing the things that they were doing. And I'm not saying like every 20 to 23-year-old is like this mature sense of like everything, but it did just feel a lot of times that this was a Hunger Games. You specifically pointed out Divergent, which I haven't read, but it felt very much like those kinds of books with those kinds of characters who were actually aged down. And the number just felt so arbitrary here that it was almost a safeguard so that some of the explicit things could happen and it not be weird, because it would be if it were children. But because they're adults in like a more adult setting and everything, it felt like it was something that you could get away with, and maybe that's part of this book. But I know you specifically called out Divergent because of some of the similarities.
Yeah, so Divergent, that comparison came more from the way that their factions are set up, and in this book, you have the quadrants and how they're set up, and like each one has their different thing. But Violet and Triss feel very comparable as our main female protagonists and how they behave, and the fact that they are these seemingly weaker characters going into this more dominant quadrant or faction that is supposed to be this warrior-like faction, and no one believes that they're going to be able to do this thing. And so when we have these things that can be compared so head on, knowing how young Triss is in her novel, I think it's so easy to make that comparison. And back with you on the age thing, that was something that really bothered me throughout the entirety of this book. I am one person that like, I want my teenagers to be teenagers and my adults to be adults, and I want them to behave accordingly. And I think something that hurt the age of these characters was the fact that they're entering in almost like this military college or this military school.
Yeah.
And I think that because of the world and society we live in our brains, you enter into college, you're still 18 years old. And so we have that framework in our minds. And I think that hurt a little bit, but also just so many of the decisions that Violet made just seemed so immature. And that's not to say, again, like you said, that every 20 to 23-year-old is all put together and has this maturity.
Especially because she's getting ripped away from what she thought she was going to do. Like her whole life thought she was going to be a scribe, and then all of a sudden her mom, who is one of the worst characters ever, or not characters, but like one of the worst people. Like imagine that being your mom, is like, no, you have to go this way. And sure, it worked out in the end because it's a book, but like in reality, that would be horrible. So like I can understand that even there she would still have some struggles, but I don't think if you had transplanted her from the writers to the scribe that she would have felt like any older. And I do feel like this, if you took a lot of the, especially this explicit romance stuff out of this book, if you age down the characters, this would fit right on the shelf next to like a Hunger Games and those kinds of things.
I agree.
Yeah. Which is interesting because obviously that scene hit me. First of all, it felt like it came completely out of left field. There was no, and this is something that we did talk about, where it felt like there was no real build up to it. And I mean, there was some like tension between them. There's that moment with the dragons that, and because they're all connected, kind of an awkward scene. That was one of the scenes that definitely made me laugh. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. The dragons are, anyway, but it just felt like that scene went from 0 to 100. And it felt like if you took those couple chapters out of this book, you could tell me these characters were like 14 to 18, and I'd believe it just as much, which was interesting. Now, we've been a little bit negative here so far with some complaints. So let's go ahead and talk about some things that we did like. And I'll start with, I specifically really liked the magic and the bonding of the dragons. Mm-hmm. And I do think it was really interesting that because of the way they're all bonded together, we get like that extra combination of Xaden, what's his dragon's name? Sagael. I wanted to call her Saphira from Aragon. Sagael, her Violet, and Taryn. Like that 4 combination, I thought was really cool. And one thing I also thought was cool is like how bonded those 2 dragons are together, and like they can't even be away from each other for more than 3 days. And obviously that ends up like being a complication for Violet and Xaden at certain points. But I think just like, and not knowing a whole lot about like the dragon politics, which are just slightly hinted at, obviously, with the other baby dragon, who I also can't remember the baby dragon's name.
It is slipping my mind.
Yeah, it's I can't remember it either, but we see a lot of things happening. And like, obviously dragons have their own society, their own rules, their own regulations, their own hierarchy. All of that stuff I thought was really cool. And obviously some of it gets watered down. Like there's like 8 different versions of this book that I think could be written for like a bunch of different people, and each one of these like avenues could be explored more fully. So like instead of it being a romantasy book, this could be like a hardcore dragon rider epic fantasy kind of book, which it tries to be, but it has, much more of those romantic elements, and I think that's more of the angle it's playing for. But I also think that it could have been like an epic fantasy dragon hierarchy, kind of book at the same time, which is at least one of the elements that I could grasp onto and like. And with coming with some of the Dragon Rider stuff, I thought the magic was cool too. How it's not like if the same dragon bonds with 2 different people, they're not going to get the same power. I thought it was cool that it's a combination of the dragon and the rider at the same time. Like they become something special, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because I think it's something to point out that I liked that aspect of it too. And when you say if the same dragon bonding with 2 different people would have different powers, if we look at General Sorrengail, she controls storms. And then we look at Violet's power. Violet wields lightning. And so we can kind of see that maybe it could have something to do with their family lines too. Like, how does all of this stuff work together? And I like those interesting different tidbits. And I liked that aspect of it. But something else I really enjoyed was we see a little bit of the government maneuverings
I like that too.
in this. And I think that is starting to lay an interesting storyline. And it was something that I liked, but also questioned, but thought was very interesting, that this government has laid the sins of the fathers on all of these children. And from a moral standpoint, it's like, what in the world and where is this going? And how are we thinking that this is okay? And so I'm interested to see where this is going. And so obviously, the plot line of, there was these rebels and now their kids are being forced to be conscripted into the Rider faction. They don't have any choice in it. They have to do this. Basically, Xaden saved their lives to say that I will be responsible for these children, and now they're going to be a part of your army. And, knowing that they're probably going to die as a result of this.
Which is what they want.
Which exactly is what this government wants. And toward the end of this book, we're starting to see that this government is fully aware that there are other people groups around them that are dying, that need their help. And they're just sitting idly by and doing nothing about it because their powers are being protected.
Yeah.
And they just don't really care. And they're kind of sacrificing people because of it.
Yeah.
And so
that's the part I liked.
Starting to see that stuff was really interesting. And I really enjoyed some of that. And that really gets into the cliffhanger at the end of the book, which really also does kind of directly steal from some other YA books, which I thought was a little bit a ripoff, but it's okay. I'll give her a pass. But I thought was incredibly interesting.
You know what's funny? I actually don't care about like the marked children at all. Like that. Like, so
interesting.
I like the political aspect of it. I don't care about any of those kids whatsoever. Probably because so many. Okay, so Liam is the only, but like the rest of them I don't care about. They're just a number at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole, like there was a rebel group, so we're holding their children responsible still. Like that's probably a bad thing, right? Like I can get on board with that, but like most of them are just a number, right? So like, but what you got to towards the end of like this government is obviously, it's kind of a 1984-ish where they're lying and changing what propaganda they're giving to their citizens and everything of what is actually going on out there. They have these fairy tales and things that a very limited number of people seem to know about, or it was a thing that like nobody would give credence to, right? But it's real, and people in the government know. People are, purposefully lying and like manipulating everybody. That's the part of the political stuff that I found fascinating. It's interesting that you kind of attached to the kids, because I really did not care about them.
Oh, no.
I didn't really care about any of the characters until Liam died, and I was like, oh, I guess I did actually care about him a little bit. But like, I don't know about you. I don't care about Violet. I don't really care about Xaden. I hate Dane. We can talk about how much I hate Dane, but that's not caring. That's not caring about Dane. I think Dane is a bad person.
Yeah.
And Dane is, so we can talk about Dane a little bit, I guess. Dane is the exact kind of person that this government wants. He is a follower of the rules to a T, to a point where it is harmful for himself and others probably. He seems to be the kind of person who, even if he was given all of the evidence, which there seems to be some hints that he knew that they were getting sent to basically die.
To death, yeah.
In the last game or whatever they were calling it. So he obviously isn't afraid of like letting his best friend die, and like he wouldn't tell her what was happening. He would rather her go die than that. And throughout this book, I hated Dane. How early on was it? The first couple of chapters where I told you that he sucked? I sent her a text and was like, Dane sucks. Because I was a little bit ahead of her in our reading. And he is the worst kind of person for a character like Violet. Violet clearly, and disagree with me, but she's clearly somebody who needed support, not protection. Because there was no, they tried to paint, or Dane tried to paint this narrative that he could get her into the scraps quarter, and there's no way her all-powerful general mother wasn't going to find out about it. Like, what kind of fairy tale are we living in? Like, obviously she was going to and get sent back anyway. And she repeatedly like kind of told him this, and over again she's like, dude, I don't need protection, I need support. And it's just so obvious, and the fact that he can't like wrap his head around that even until the very end of the book is just crazy to me.
Yeah, 2 points I want to touch on. One is the Violet piece, in that I want to like Violet as a main character. I do. And there are some redeemable qualities
Yeah, I'm not saying I'll never like her.
about her.
Yeah. But like in this book, she's just like the vehicle that the story is following.
Yes,
for me.
but that goes back to, I think the thing that I was saying up front is that there's a lot of characters that are so one note.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
our protagonist is one of the worst of that, which is that she is just the, you know, the weak girl who has to learn to be strong to make it through,
Yeah.
and that's it. And it's like, can we just let our ladies be a little bit something else? Can they just like, can she not cry because she had to kill somebody who was actually a bad person? Can like she just stand in her power for like 5 seconds? I just want that for Violet.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of hoping we can get there, and maybe that will give her some oomph that I want out of her. And
I think she was maybe starting to get there a little bit towards the end.
I think she was.
Yeah.
And I also don't want us to like gloss over the fact that neither one of us is like a chronic pain sufferer.
Yeah.
We do not have a chronic illness. But I think that is important representation. I don't want to comment on whether or not it is done particularly well, but it is at least something that is talked about in this story.
It is an element that's brought up for her multiple times.
Yeah, in a way that other books don't talk about. And I think that it is an important part of this story because it does feed into what so many different characters are doing and how they're maneuvering throughout the book, particularly with Dane. And I can't stand him because all he does is baby her. This is supposed to be somebody who has known her whole life. And instead of be with her, support her, and trust that she's and this is the other thing that doesn't make her feel like a grown woman who has made her own decisions, is because Dane just keeps coming along and saying, you can't do this. You cannot do this. You cannot do this. It's like, no, she is sitting here telling you that even if she can't, she has no choice. So instead of just telling her she can't, why don't you just help her?
Yeah.
Like actually support her, teach her, train her, give her tips and tricks that will make this easier on her instead of trying to make things different for her and move her into the scribes. Just do the things that Xaden is actually doing, the person that you are so convinced is trying to kill her.
Yeah.
Why don't you actually just step into that role instead? And then when she tells you this person you have known for far less time in her life tried to kill her, just believe her. Don't use your fancy touch her face magic to see her memories without her consent, try to steal that memory away from her. Just trust your friend who you've known, who's supposedly your best friend in the entire world. Just trust her.
For what? It would have been like 19 years of his life, right? Because she's like a year younger. So like
that.
I think he's supposed to be, because this is another question I have for you too. So this is obviously supposed to be like an enemies to lover kind of story.
Yeah.
To me, other than the very first interaction, because he literally says he's gonna like kill her when she crosses the parapet, or does he even say it that explicitly? Does he just say something along the lines of like, you're mine, or I'll deal with you, or something like that? I think I can't remember. But
there are nods. Yeah.
But other than that, Xaden does nothing the entire time except be like a great person to her. And so I never really believed the enemies to lover thing all that much. If anything, the real enemy was the crazy guy, Jack. I almost called him Jacob because Twilight. Jack. Jack is like the real enemy. Like if you're gonna rank the three bad guys in this, Xaden is like the bottom one. Then it's Dane. Dane is more of a bad guy than Xaden is, and then it's him because he's like a psychopath serial killer. And like it would have been for me, and maybe I don't have like any experience with enemies to lovers, like any of this stuff. It would have been more of like if somehow she fell in love with him than Xaden even, which like I guess maybe that's not normally how that trope works, but like I never really believed, like to me it was so clear and obvious that Xaden wasn't like the bad guy so early on that it was hard for me to believe that, like, because like another thing that did bother me about this was like the school is supposed to be ruthless. You can just like kill anybody and you'll get away with it. Like even in training, like somebody tries to stab her literally while they're not even supposed to be allowed to. So like obviously these kinds of things are allowed to happen. So like Xaden could have like done anything at any time. And so it very quickly to me just realized like he wasn't the bad guy. And so like maybe that enemies to lovers thing, like I can get why some people would look at it that way. But for me, it just ended up being like this is more of the reluctant, like ending up with the person I should instead of the person I shouldn't. Because clearly there's supposed to be more of a pull to Dane. And to me, I never believed that either. That like, she even says like, this is like when he kisses her, she's like, this is what I've always wanted. But to me, before it even happened, it was very clearly like not what she wanted anymore. Maybe before all of this stuff had happened. Like to me, and so that's one thing with this. I just never really believed that like Xaden wasn't going to be the one she ended up with. And Dane obviously was like an ass that she just was never going to. And so I don't know.
I think part of that, there are also varying levels of enemies to lovers and the tropes. And I will be honest, and I'm not even probably the best to speak on some of these.
I don't think any of us have read too much
romantasy as a genre in particular,
Yeah.
but I have probably read more than you have.
This is only my second one, so yeah.
So
yeah.
And most of mine is more from the YA sphere than
Okay.
it is
Yeah,
in what
right.
would be considered the adult sphere.
Yep.
So there's definitely varying levels, but I think that just goes back to the fact that a lot of this we're seeing through Violet's eyes, and we just don't believe that. Like, Violet's behavior doesn't read as a 21-year-old. And I think that that is a lot of it, because a lot of it is we can see Dane for what he is.
Yeah.
And then Violet's just like, I don't trust him. He's such a bad dude. And it's like, no,
Oh, yeah.
dude, no, he's not. Like, he
Yeah,
literally is not actually a bad guy.
Yeah, maybe that is the more of the problem I'm having then, is the thoughts and feelings that Violet is having just feel so wrong. And maybe it's because we are older that we can see these toxic traits in relationships, because been there, done that, those kinds of things. Like maybe it's, if I were younger again, I could believe it a little bit more, but I don't even think then at the age she is that I feel like I was a little bit past some of those things now. I mean, so, and that goes back to maybe not everybody is, but it is just one of those interesting things that with like that whole triangle that was trying to build up, it felt like a straight line for me the whole time. There was no triangle. It was a line to Xaden.
I agree. And I think it's just, and maybe that is that the way Violet was written just didn't feel old enough or mature. And maybe old enough, maybe it's just mature enough.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of that maturity comes with age. And so maybe that's just part of our problem. And maybe that's just, the way Yarrow structured the book and the choices and behavior of our female protagonists. And I just, honestly, this is not a dig at Yarrow. This is kind of a dig at publishing in general. We like to write female protagonists this way, where they're very wishy-washy. They don't know what they want. They can't see the good. They're always not trusting. They're always kind of, Yeah,
I feel like I've read one of two female protagonists a lot. And this is obviously broad generalizations. I have read great females in fantasy books and everything. But a lot of time it's they're so weak and frail. How could they ever do this? Or they're so big and strong, kind of like Brienne of Tarth. Like, like, there's so many of like, they're either one side of the spectrum or the other. And I don't know, I guess maybe I would have just liked a little bit more from here. Yeah.
Just stand in your power, girl.
Yeah, well, because like there's characters in like, you haven't read the series, but there's a character in the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. Her name is Orca, and I think she's great because she's a mother, but also this like warrior, and I think it's just like a great combination of everything. And so like maybe I've been spoiled a little bit by some of these better like female, at least better to me, female character representations of like what a multifaceted character actually looks like, because that goes back to the one note thing.
Yeah.
But let's change a little bit just here and talk about how predictable did you think this book was?
I think that's a really good question. From a romance aspect, I think that it was incredibly predictable.
Okay.
Especially in the types of YA, dystopian, fantasy realm of fiction and speculative fiction. There's always a love triangle.
Right.
There is always, and a lot of times it is the guy I'm supposed to be with versus the guy that's not so good for me. And so that, I think, was relatively predictable. I was not prepared for the government maneuverings. I was not prepared for how deep we were going to get into all of the factions, like the military stuff and how the government worked and kind of how, crappy the government is. And I wasn't prepared for a lot of that. And the end hit me like a ton of bricks, and maybe it shouldn't have. but I did not see that one coming. Like
Okay.
that one was out of nowhere. But
I thought this was like an extremely predictable book.
Yeah.
For a lot of things, I think. So the very very ending, I didn't expect to get the mythical, well, like the
wyvern,
wyvern,
and the
and
Vemin,
I didn't expect to get those, but I totally expected the government betrayal, because to me, as soon as you learn that Xaden is responsible for all of these kids, to me it was very clear that like obviously they don't want them. If they can get rid of them, they're going to. I thought it was really predictable. In one of two ways of what kind of dragon she was going to get. She was clearly either going to get literally the biggest, baddest dragon, because they mentioned him. And so I was like, okay, so that's her dragon. And then when they talked about the small, frail dragon Feathertail, I was like, okay, so it's either that dragon or that. I didn't really expect them to get both.
Yeah.
But like to me, it was very clear that it was going to go one way or another. And then I already kind of talked about it was a straight line to Xaden for me the whole time for a lot of that. So I don't know. I guess I just was a little bit curious on like predictability as a whole.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think in foreshadowing, I knew everything that was coming except for the cliffhanger.
And maybe predictable isn't even the right way. Maybe the clues were just given to you, where if you're like looking for them in any meaningful way, like they're kind of there for you. So maybe it's not even necessarily predictability, but it's like, I mean, you can miss anything. I have missed very obvious things in books, even when it's literally like right in my face. But this one, it just felt like, you kind of got it the whole way, which though maybe predictability, like I said, predictability maybe isn't the best word to use there, but it did feel like I could kind of know what was going on, which I think maybe put me in a little bit. When I was reading this, I went into like a little bit of a slump with it, where I was just like, oh no, this is going down that really like bad path where like I'm going to end up hate reading this. And I think maybe it's because I was just guessing so many things that I was like, can we just get through all of this? And then it ended up picking up again. So I don't know. That was one thing I thought about.
I guess a better thing would be like it subverted my expectations a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
I knew going into it that it was a romantasy, and I knew that dragons were heavily involved.
Yeah.
But I was not expecting some of the more fantasy elements of the military. So I guess it was like more of a subversion of expectations. Once we're in the story, yes, I could guess all of the plot points that were coming. Okay. I knew what was being fed to me.
Yeah. And I don't think that necessarily means it's bad.
It's a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that that's bad. It was just one thing that I thought about while reading this is like, how many of these puzzle pieces could I put together before we got there? Which there are plenty of really good books. Like I think if you look at even some of Sanderson's stuff, like if you know what clues to be looking for, like she figured out stuff that I should have, but because she's almost done with Mistborn Era 1. No spoilers for Mistborn Era 1, but she has put things together that like I didn't, but it clearly shows that like clues are there to do those things. And so like I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's just one of my observations with it. So is there anything else you want to talk about before we talk about the very end of the book?
I will say too that I understand why people like this, and that this is a very consumable book.
Yes.
The structure of the chapters are written in such a way that even the chapters end on cliffhangers. And so even when it wasn't like, oh my gosh, it's the best book I've ever read, I can't stop. It was like, oh, you did that to me. I have to keep going, like, because I want to know what's going to happen next. Even if I knew what it was going to be, I had to like confirm that was what was going to happen. And so it is a very, very consumable book. And I think we both read it very quickly because of that.
Yeah.
And so I understand why people are like latching onto this series, and I get its popularity. Yep. And I don't want to necessarily, it's like overhyped or it's underhyped, but like I get why it's popular, and I get why people are enjoying it.
Yep.
And we did too. Like I don't want to sit here. We enjoyed the book.
I'm not gonna badmouth this book. Like I know
we enjoyed it.
You very easily could, but I'm not going to. Like I said, I had a decent enough time with it. And one thing I will say about why, so it's consumable, all those things. I think another thing, and I kind of already touched on this a little bit, is when I talked about there being a bunch of different books inside of this one. The fact that there are like so many different things that you can attach to, and I talked to somebody else about this actually. The fact that there are so many different elements in here that you can attach to, be like, this is what I'm really drawn to, whether it be the romance, whether it be the magic, the politics. Like there's so many things that are just kind of put in here and put in a way that make it easily consumable, make you want to keep reading, keep you on like your toes. Even when you know what's happening, you're still like you said, you got to make sure, because like you could always guess wrong. But so just all of that. So like I actually have a lot of respect for this book and what it's doing. And obviously it is nice to see that like it's getting more people to read more things. I said multiple times, like, I can't believe, when I was initially reading it, I think I said multiple times, like, I can't believe this is what people are putting on the pedestal of like the best thing they've read. But the more I thought about it, like if you came from like a lot of people, you didn't read for a long time, but some of your formative reads were The Hunger Games, Twilight, like all of those things. And then you go from that, you don't read for a super long time, and then you come to like this series. Totally understand why. And that's not the only reason you can like it, but I can see that pipeline is just like, it's just there, and I totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the end just a little bit. And when I mean the end, I mean the very, very end, where she's in where the rebellion city started, I guess, or the city where the rebellion started, or where like all the rebellion people are. They've been told it's been burnt down and it's destroyed, but it's
Been
like
rebuilt.
many other things that the government is lying and not completely truthful and everything. And we get what is definitely this is the one thing I definitely did not predict. I did not predict her brother being alive. No. So how did you feel about that? And what do you think that has for like implications going forward into the next books? Let's get some predictions and stuff going here as we try to wrap this one up.
So first of all, we've been told throughout the entire story, the reason that Violet and Xaden are supposed to hate each other is because Xaden's dad killed Violet's brother, Brennan, and Xaden's dad like led the rebellion. And then Violet's mom, General Sorrengail, killed Xaden's dad. And this is why they hate each other, because the Sorrengails and the Ryersons don't get along.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Violet is super sick. She's dying. And what does Xaden do? Take her to her not dead brother, who his dad didn't actually kill, to be healed.
Yeah.
Because her brother's a mender, and so he can just magically like
undo things. And yeah.
I did not see that one coming from a mile away.
I didn't either.
And
I actually liked it though.
I did. It was wild. It was wild. And I think that I will be interested to see whether or not General Sorrengail is aware of Brennan being alive, because I think that will be really telling.
Yeah.
Because if she is aware, then that tells how deep the government is lying.
Okay. My prediction is she doesn't know. Do you want to agree with me, or are you going to be on the other that she does know and she just doesn't care? Because I'm going to go with she doesn't know, which maybe is giving her too much credit, but I feel like I've got to at least give her that one.
Part of me wants to be in that camp, but also part of me thinks that she does know.
Okay, so you're gonna go. Okay, so we'll be on opposite sides for that one. Another prediction is: how long do you think it takes for Violet and Xaden to get over whatever little tiff they're in?
Mid Iron Flame.
Mid Iron Flame. Okay, I'm gonna think it drags out all the way to the end of that book,
which will hope not.
Which will be exhausting if they are fighting and don't like each other. I'm gonna predict that they don't make up until like legitimately the last chapter of Iron Flame. That's gonna be my prediction.
I don't want to hate Violet, and I will hate Violet if that's what happens.
That will be such an exhausting experience, but I do think that is what's going to happen.
I don't want it.
Okay, and then third, do you think they're going back to the school, or do you think this is going to turn into just full blown their rebellion, or do you think they're going to go back to the school and have to? I'm sure they can figure out a way to make that work, but do you think they're going back to the school, or are they full on with the rebellion? We're fighting against the people we were just with.
I think that we go back to Basgiath at some point in this story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we immediately go back to Basgiath, and I don't know if we ever return as students.
Interesting. Okay. I am more in the camp of we end up back there sooner. Like, I think pretty quickly they end up back there, because I think there's too much going on with them not being able to cover up some of the stuff that they are. I don't know. I don't know. The more I talk about it, the less I believe it myself, but I am going to go with like they return back.
Here's part of my thinking though.
Okay.
Part of me thinks that Brennan was with the Ryersons. He knew about the Venin and like what was going on with them, and he wanted to help the other cities.
Yeah.
And General Sorrengail,
she said no,
couldn't let that happen.
Of course, yeah.
And so she faked his death.
Okay, well that would blow up my prediction that she doesn't know.
Right. Yeah. I think she faked his death to get more people on her side.
Interesting. Okay.
To make it easier for her also to kill Ryerson.
Yeah, but I feel like they would have just done it.
I think they would have anyway. I agree. I agree that they still would have killed.
Yeah, I think they could have. I don't know.
But I think she knew that he was. I think that she knew that Brennan had turned on her.
Interesting. I'm gonna go with no. I don't think so. I think we're gonna end up.
I just really don't like her either. So
well, I don't really
just
like
think she's
her
a bad
either. I think
person.
she is a
So
bad-
that's why
no,
I think
no.
she knows.
I do. But I think I'm gonna go with no, and I can't wait for this to just be absolutely wrong. But I'm gonna go with she doesn't still.
It's fine.
And I do think that they end up back in school. Like
I can get a little bit more on board with that one.
Yeah.
But
because there's
we'll
because there's still so many more marked kids coming that Xaden can't. He's not gonna be able to leave them. Which means if he can't leave them, Violet also can't leave them. So they're gonna end up back there to try to protect them, bring them in.
Here's
all that
another
kind of
question.
stuff.
Whose side does Mira stay on when she finds out Brennan is alive? Her mom's?
No,
Or the rebellions?
I think she would. I think she has like her head screwed on straight, but I don't think she's gonna be privy to that information for a really long time. I think that's gonna be like
That's fair.
Yeah, that's gonna be a book or two from now before she even gets that information.
Do we think Dane can be redeemable?
Ooh, yeah, I think to an extent, yes. Like I feel like you can always hold that what he did against him, but could he be? Yes. Will he be? No.
I like that answer.
Yeah, I think he could be. I think he could like champion a bunch of forces and go to help and like kind of blow up the thing because he should be a wing leader in this next year at school. So you would think that people like respect him and he can kind of be change if he wanted it to be. But I don't think he's going to do that personally.
I don't either.
Yeah, I think at some point we get some big showdown between him and Xaden, and Xaden probably kills him. Yeah, something like that. I have a feeling that is a showdown that's going to happen, and Violet's like watching or something, because of course she is.
We're interested to see who she's not afraid to kill in books moving forward. I thought
that's a good question. If she can be, well, and I don't think she's going to become much more callous because I think her main goal is going to be the venom and the wyvern and stuff, and it's really going to allow her to like shield herself from having to kill people. I think that's going to be kind of her get out of jail free card of like keeping her morality while still being like still having like action in the book.
Yeah.
It's just going to be wyvern and venom and that kind of stuff versus regular people.
Yeah.
So anything else you think about this book that you want to get off your chest?
I did not intend to read this book. I also did not go into it expecting to like it. But when he was like, I want to read more romantasy, I was like, I'll read it with you.
Yeah.
And then here we are. So we're kind of in the same boat, but give it a try. Don't write it off.
No, I think if you are somebody who is even remotely interested in the series, it's not an you don't have to overcommit. It's a very light read. You're going to be able to breeze through it. And I do think it's worth to at least try and see, because then you can at least have like an informed opinion about because it's so easy to just like look at it and scoff and be like, that's trash. You should like read it first, right?
And if you're somebody who doesn't really like smut, there's about 2 full chapters you can just skip.
You could. Yeah.
And you've missed all of it, and you haven't missed major plot points.
Yeah, that is true.
So you can kind of ignore that part if you're worried about it.
Yeah.
So.
But I think that's going to be all from us. Definitely let us know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Would love to hear your theories, what you thought of our opinions on everything. Obviously, we kind of covered a whole lot of stuff in a whole bunch of different ways. So I would love to hear anything you guys have below down in the comments. But as always, remember to read what you want when you want.